Hi, everyone, and welcome to Framing Projects for Success podcast. My guest for today is Adrian Sikorski. He's an opportunity framing workshop facilitator, a decision analyst working in a resource industry in South Australia. He's also an expert in decision quality, portfolio management, really helping teams to bring some great ideas to life. So, Adrian, thank you so much for being here today on the show. And I'm so grateful to chat with you today.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about who you are and what are you currently doing. We go from there.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm trained as an engineer, right? I went to the Colorado School of Mines and want to work internationally. So I got a job with Shell shortly after that. And they sent me to Holland, and I spent a long time in field development planning there in that group. And the things we're going to talk about today lend themselves to that kind of environment, right? The studies environment. And so I learned a lot of kind of hard lessons, I guess, in that environment about how framing might be able to help, and didn't really have a toolkit back then to help those things. And then I shifted around and did some operational things in Russia and Middle East, and eventually started to think, oh yeah, I actually would really like to understand sort of how we do this decision making thing, a bit more seriously, and kind of shifted my focus into economics and planning, and moved down to South Australia here and started helping people as an analyst, as an economic analyst, for large mega projects, right? So huge resource projects, multi tens of billions of dollars of US dollar projects, and largely watching lots of things not necessarily go perfectly well in those projects, right? And sort of thinking to myself, well, how can we do this better? Like, how can we really like get better at this? And those sort of lessons I learned at Shell, it kind of stuck with me in terms of being curious about how to make those things smoother, better, get better results and better traction, better utilize those resources that we have to do those things. And eventually I did my master's in petroleum business management here in Adelaide at the University of Adelaide. I'm very lucky to have an emeritus professor there who's a global expert in decision analysis, Steve Begg. And I just found decision and risk analysis, almost by happenstance, right? Like it was just a fantastic coincidence that he was one of these people that could really give me that toolkit. And ever since then, I haven't really been able to let it go, and I've been using it kind of in everything that I do in relation to my own consulting, to work with companies, to work with other consultants as well, to really make sure that those kind of things are known, are taught, are used, and are good tools for people to pick up and improve their decision making process.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I've been doing that since, well, probably really in earnest since 2013, 14. And it sort of culminated very recently in my certification with the Society of Decision Professionals as a lead practitioner just recently. And really enjoy doing that with teams. And framing for me, like we'll talk about framing today, that's a big part of it. That's a huge part of
Okay, so well, let's explain everyone what do you actually talk about. So I ask about, and I usually talk about opportunity framing workshop, and but you talk about like decision analysts. So let's start with just to explain and give the context. Who
it.
is a decision analyst? What do they actually do, and how does it fit with this opportunity framing?
Yeah. So I mean, decision analysis has a long history, right? It's been with us for a long time. It's got some very strong theoretical foundations. It's sort of the beginning of what we call decision science now, and spilling over into kind of data science. And a decision analyst is someone who helps people through and teams through that process of complex decision making under uncertainty, and that can take many forms, right? Um, and it can scale from very small to very large. And that person uh, sometimes is a facilitator, sometimes as an analyst, sometimes as a structured thinker, sometimes as an advocate, sometimes is a sounding board in that process with the decision maker, right? It's often done in a dialogue, right, where we have this conversation with the decision maker. What is your kind of situation, where the framing part of it comes in? How do we kind of figure out how we could solve that, which is one of the main products of kind of our framing? And then how do we then analyze that using things that people might find very valuable? Often that's a financial kind of model or an economic model. And then understanding how we compare those ways that we might solve that opportunity or that decision we're facing, and then get to our final commitment to action, right? So touching all those elements of something called decision quality.
Like, how do you find connecting those two different roles?
It's certainly a challenge, and it doesn't come easy, right? I mean, having worked with a lot of people who are engineers or analysts or financial analysts, and then they want to get more towards this sort of opportunity framing side, right? It's a whole different set of skills, right? Your formal training may be in something quantitative, and you know how to kind of understand these consequences with models and things like that. Shifting that thinking and bringing that background into a conversation with people where confusion is common, where lack of clarity is common, where diverging motivations are common, where all the things that are like in what we call the psychology side of kind of decision science, right? Things that can affect how you go about decision making, why you even think it's an important thing to make this decision, start to come into play and dominate your toolkit, right? So it's not easy to develop both of those skills, and it certainly is a challenge to keep both of them at cutting edge, right? Data science side is really moving on very, very quickly. We talk about more of that later, I guess. But the psychology side is also moving very quickly, right? One of the things that we've learned over the last many years is that there are lots of things that we can understand about human behavior systematically as well, right? I mean, I'm sure we'll probably talk about Kanban at some point also, but bringing those sort of toolkits into the framing is something you need to practice and learn explicitly, right? It's not just something that you just go, okay, well, I'm going to now sort of do this every day, right? There are skills, there are techniques, understanding about yourself and others and your motivation that you need to at least be aware of at the very least, and probably pretty good at understanding how to help people through that as part of the framing process. Because framing is really about getting alignment and clarity between a group, amongst a group, with the decision maker or on behalf of the decision maker, to start that whole process of comparing how you might make a decision.
This is really great. So, Adrian, tell us a little bit about the companies that you work with. What kind of sector, what kind of projects they work with, how big they are. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah. I've been really lucky that I worked with companies of all sizes, right? I mean, working with companies that were, 10 people in an office, right? And we're focused on resources. Generally, it's been focused on resources, right? And some of that ranges all from the, the small companies where it's, like I said, 10 of us in an office, sometimes less, all the way through to global scale companies. I worked for Shell for a long time. Now I do some work with BHP. I work with Santos, large resource companies. But I've also spent some time in kind of health tech areas as well, and some middle-sized companies as well. When I started with Santos, it wasn't a huge company. It was sort of a medium to large sort of enterprise, and some other sort of middle-sized companies as well. Maybe 100 to 150 people kind of size. So a large scale of representation of different size companies, and seeing a lot of different processes in that. And it's mostly I've been able to deploy kind of these decision techniques in resources. And one of the reasons we do that is because it's a lot of big bets, right? Resource companies make projects, investments on a routine basis, anywhere from many millions to many billions. Right, a company like a Shell or an Exxon or a Rio or something will have a capital budget of many billions of dollars every year. Sometimes tens or more of billions of dollars every year on a rolling basis, ongoing basis. And to do that kind of at an industrial scale, you need systems and processes, and you need to be able to do that repeatedly and have skills to be able to do that repeatedly. So, it takes to do that with high quality repeatedly, right? Not just like, oh, we can kind of do this and rely on the gifted amateurs, right? It needs to be repeatable. And that's really what things like decision analysis, and for me, especially opportunity framing, allow, right? That's, I think, one of the most critical pieces for being able to do that on a consistent basis, to get these big projects up, to get internal complex set of stakeholders, complex set of internal and external stakeholders sometimes aligned to sort of where you're heading, how you want to kind of, what size of project you even maybe want to bite off at the beginning, and then how you mature that into an idea that you can invest in eventually to get some benefit for your company, right? For your stakeholders and your shareholders.
Yeah. Yes, it's interesting. Adrian, you work with so many different organizations, mining and oil and gas. What do you think the other people, what do you think the other projects, what do they need to know about opportunity framing, like
Yeah.
it's like this, it's like a secret in the industry that we have, and who knows what, right? And no one else, if you go to education, if you go to a typical construction company, if you go to IT, they haven't got a clue what we're talking about.
Oh,
They're getting into agile and design sprints.
yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but they have no clue about. So how do we solve those big decisions? What problems do we solve? And
Yeah.
then how do we use those framing workshops? So what would you tell them? What are they missing on?
Well, for me, my watchword with framing is clarity, right? And all those things that you mentioned, especially the uncertainty, especially the decision, right? The real critical part at the beginning. I mean, we've all worked on projects. Like lots of people worked on projects, right? And you start this project, and it's kind of like, well, I don't kind of know this, and I don't kind of know that, and this might happen, and I have some good ideas, and someone over here has a solution, and the management has a solution, or my leader has a solution, or I have a solution, or maybe this, whatever. We start with some kind of solutions, and what you have to have is like I don't know, like it's a bag of kind of jumbled Legos. What I guess to draw an analogy, you got two boys, right? A lot of Legos around. They draw an analogy, right? It's you got this bag of jumbled Legos, and the opportunity framing process, gives you kind of a space where you can come together and communicate about it, right? And that's where the role of the facilitator is critical, right? Because it lets people communicate about all those things that are running around in their head. Typically, we call these issues, right? That are running around in their head that are, related to my project, but are kind of giving me, maybe they're worrying me. Maybe I'm worrying about this something, or maybe I'm worrying about it. And it gives us an opportunity to get it out of our head onto a paper for a shared collaborative conversation about, well, what is this thing, right? What is this thing that's worrying me, right? And start to kind of categorize those and sort through those things and say, well, is this something in my control? Like, well, that's an uncertainty, right? I just have to kind of understand what its impact is going to be, right? Or is this kind of a decision, something that's in my control, right? Those are the kind of things, right? And gives you a chance to, if you have a facilitator, have someone who forces you into that discipline of getting it clear in your own mind, right? This problem that we have in front of us, right? What is this kind of in relation to? And as we do that, it often becomes very clear what the actual decision that we're facing is, or the opportunity that we're facing is. Sometimes people call it a problem, but I prefer to use more positive language, right? This decision about this deliberate allocation of resources, or this opportunity about how I'm going to create something of interest for others, or for myself in this space, right? And taking people through that process of even just getting to that simple writing down that statement, like the classic sort of Einstein, quote, right? If I had an hour to solve your problem, I'd spend 99% of the time thinking about what the problem is, 1% of the time thinking about the solution, right? That's what opportunity framing gives you a chance to do collectively, right? For everyone that's sort of relevant to that problem, and or that situation, that decision situation. And as you bring them collectively as a facilitator through that conversation and begin to structure their thoughts and give them something to look at, put things on a page and say, here's kind of how I'm structuring what you're thinking in relation to things that we can go away and then unpack, whether that's decisions or uncertainties or metrics or whatever it is that's related to that. How I'm going to distinguish, how I'm going to measure, my preferences. It gives them, puts those things on a piece of paper, on a board, on a digital space, or whatever it is that they can look at and go, yeah, that's kind of capturing this thing that was worrying me about it. It's putting it in context of some other things that we're worried about. It's then putting them in sort of a way that we can think about our decision in this structured way, right? And we use a lot of structuring, right? Framing is a lot of products we create is in structuring from the frame. And those structured things become helpful communication devices, right? That's what they become. They become this object that this artifact that we can look at and say, this piece of paper reflects my thinking in a way that helps me organize my own thoughts and get clarity.
Yeah. Did you hear it? I'm just talking to all the other guys that don't know about framing. And I think you said something absolutely amazing, Adrian. Which is really that clarity. And I sort of find different articles on LinkedIn and through my colleagues from the Project Management Institute sharing about like why projects fail. And there seemed to be a little bit of that tendency to just really, I would say, manage symptoms as opposed to address the root causes. But because the Project Management Institute life cycle is so much different from the life cycle in oil and gas industry, the project managers got like this blind spots. They actually don't see, because they usually train that they start with project initiation, but really that's when they confirm the scope. So you could see that this is actually when we stop doing value improvement activities, we're just focusing on execution. So they're missing out on the whole stage, the whole development stage. So they're not really familiar with the whole idea stage and the concept stage. Right? So this is very interesting, because you say if you want clarity, I mean, this is very important for people to know. You've got to go back into your idea and fully define your idea before, you don't define your idea, you have a scope.
Yes. Yeah. And we in our other conversations, this idea came up as well, and I think you're reflecting it really well right now. It's this idea between, are we doing the project right, which is really kind of what project management is, right? Are we delivering this well? Do we have clarity on what these things we actually are delivering, versus the part before that, which is, are we doing the right project, right? And those two different frames on the same question, or a similar question, right, is really the difference between sort of what you might think of as the decision making space applied to project management, right? Like, how do we actually start? What do we want to work on, right? What's the best thing for us to work on? What's the best idea for us to go out and start to implement, versus how do we then do that well, right? And you said that about the PMI. I mean, oil and gas and other big resources industries also went through a long period in the past where they, weren't all necessarily good at delivering projects, right? There was a long period of time where it's just like we just relied on engineers and the technical teams, and project management kind of as a skill was just not, widely applied, right? And now we have lots of different disciplines that have kind of fallen out of that. Professional project managers, with different methodologies, construction engineering managers, right, industrial engineering managers that sort of specialize in delivering that in kind of different ways, in addition to kind of what used to be just a very technical kind of thing. And that's good and appropriate, right? We should do, right? Delivery, performance, execution of projects is important, really important, right? Because that's delivering on our promises that we said to whoever gave us the money to go off and do it, right? Like that's really critical. But making sure at the beginning that team is very focused, right? That clarity of confirming that scope has been done beforehand, right? And that's just a check step almost at that point, right? Are you happy that this is what we're going to deliver? Because you've done this framing, comparison, decision-making step at the beginning. And sometimes that means thinking about portfolio. Sometimes that means thinking about just different ways we could deliver a single project or across a group of things like that. At the beginning, you've had those conversations, in the phase gate to the language, often things like initiate or opportunity assessment or concept, or those early stages of ideation that go from, is this a good idea, to, oh wait, I think there's a good idea, to how could we actually solve this and make this a good idea, and this is maybe the one that we like, to then, oh, here that becomes a scope, and then we've got to deliver it efficiently and effectively using the resources we've assigned to it, right? And that kind of like delivery step is, it's kind of maybe the difference between project management and kind of this decision analysis. And there probably can and should be a lot of overlap, right? The front end loading ideas of projects, spill into that, are we working on the right project space? And I've met some really good project managers that become great decision people at the beginning, because they see the consequence of, oh wait, we didn't get our thinking right at this front end part, this framing, and what is our decision problem part, what is our opportunity problem part, opportunity statement part, into then how they go about delivering that efficiently and effectively. So that's kind of like, it's a similar path I followed, right? You start thinking about, I'm very technical, I'm engineering, and then we start thinking about planning, long-term cost forecasting or value forecasting, and then you start thinking about the different ways we could do that, and then you kind of, I've basically worked my way back up that chain rather than coming at it from the psychology side and the facilitator side. And I've met a lot of really good people from that side as well, because they approach it very differently, right? Their minds are usually very highly divergent, which is awesome to have at the framing process. So I think it's a really fascinating dichotomy that kind of exists in the way we allocate resources and make decisions now. It's
yeah. Yeah. Well, this is just spot on what you said, and I just want to repeat what you said, that if you really want to improve your project success rate, start focusing on improving your project execution phase.
Yeah.
Go to those early phases. So you might not have that, so you might have to create that. So my question for
Yes.
you, you know, so you have to create those early phases.
Yeah.
And so when we really go into decision analysis and framing, we don't talk about project execution. We really talk about those two phases
Yes.
before the project execution. And that's a very important distinction for
Yes.
project managers who might not be familiar with the opportunity and project management life cycle, where you start with an idea,
Hmm.
then you're looking at options. What are the ways I can solve my problem? Then you develop your solution, and then you move into execution. So, Adrian, you got a lot of expertise in portfolio management, and portfolio management is a really big topic right now. There seem to be a lot of organization looking at, okay, we know we're not doing great. There's a large amount of changes and uncertainty all around the world. So
Mm,
many changes in terms of, remote working, new technology, focus on
mm,
AI, all this stuff. You said something really important. You said before you focus on how you're doing your project, you need to understand how to choose the right
mm.
project.
Yeah, and that's really good organizations that's they've set themselves up to do that by default. And a lot of organizations, they have not, right? And it really is around, a couple different things, right? It- what do we want to accomplish, right? And sometimes at the sort of organizational level, it's like having sort of, mission statements, vision statements, et cetera, right? But that's kind of then becomes secondary with then, how does rubber hit the road in terms of the corporate strategy? Where do you want to go? And I'm not sort of really a corporate strategist, but they're related kind of topics, right? Um, but
Mhm.
then sort of getting down to this sort of like, well, what do we want to accomplish, right? Thinking about what do we want to accomplish with our portfolio of projects, right? Where do we want to kind of take our company? Like, how could we deliver that strategy of possible strategies for the company and comparing them, right? So that's taking that kind of like project level up to the next level of, what group of projects would we then like to have, right? That's what portfolio is asking yourself, right? What group of projects would we like to have? And if you're in resources, it's often kind of like, well, where do we want to focus our effort in terms of kinds of resources, right? And it's very critical right now for a lot of the energy companies, right? Do they want to focus on continued extraction of things like fossil fuels? Do they want to shift into things like carbon capture? Do they want to shift into other kind of areas? Do they want to become more mineral companies? Do they want to go into hydrogen? Do they want to go in renewables, right? Do they want to stay in the electricity sort of space? All those kind of things. And those might be thought of as your sort of different, company portfolio strategies, right? And how you might go that at a sort of portfolio level, and what mix you would want across those things. And they might have dozens or hundreds of projects among each of those things to help you distinguish, right? Because that's what you want to do with your decision process, is distinguish between the relative attractiveness of those different ways of going about it, right? And that conversation is around, well, kind of what do you want to accomplish with this portfolio? What's the intent here? And then that links through the analytics and say, well, we can understand the consequences of those things and say, well, against this thing I'm trying to object I'm trying to achieve, right? Maybe that's higher financial returns or a more diverse portfolio or more robustness or specific focus on company organizational expertise and staying with energy or whatever it is, right? How does this, strategy, portfolio, group of projects deliver against that objective, right? And they need a metric to sort of align those things. Often that's financial, sometimes it's organizational quality, sometimes it's a bunch of, if you're really lucky, a sort of explicit social value kind of framework that you can test against and say, well, this achieves very well on this dimension, but very poorly on that dimension. And those dimensions might be, in the social value context, what does this do to my carbon footprint? What does this do to my water resources? What does this do to my local community engagement? What does this do to my government level engagement? What does this do to my supply chain diversity, or however you want to measure those things in terms of your specific stakeholders, right? But that combination of, how could I steer the organization portfolio wise, and how do I measure that versus how do I then select that right combination of things and measure that against the uncertainties is that critical conversation, right? That's a big loop that often is very challenging to do. And from our framing kind of process, the bit that you need to bring in is, well, what do I want to achieve, right? What's important to me, right? Is it purely financial returns? Is it diversity of portfolio? Is it a huge workforce centered in one specific area? You want to leverage that, right? All those things are kind of the areas, dimensions you want to compare against as you have that conversation about how do I get the right group of projects together for the company.
I mean, this is a huge topic, and I wonder from your experiences, what's a good ratio? It's like you look at. I saw interesting analysis between Exxon and BP, and they went different strategy at some point. And what's really interesting that those projects, we're talking about projects that take years. I mean, especially if you're in a SaaS phase, I mean, before you get an return on investment, it could be even 5 years. So
more. Yeah, more
yeah,
sometimes, right? I mean, your time horizons in these big mega projects, I mean, very long-lived assets are measured in decades. I mean, really decades, right? Sometimes, huge global scale assets, 100 years or more, right? Of time you're going to spend in this resource asset, developing it, investing in it, operating it, getting resource value out of that to create value for others. You're going to spend a long time doing that. So that's the kind of time horizon you've got to start thinking on. Yeah. And the one thing we haven't yet touched on, which I think is where you're going with this part, is the uncertainty, right? So the things that are outside of our control, the things that are going to affect us while we're delivering that, both at the beginning and then over long periods of time, right? It's not unusual for, resource assessment would be a 30-year time horizon. And on a discounted cash flow basis, that's by the time you get out to the end there's not much going on, even if you have sort of relatively low discount rates, right? But, as inflation bites and everything starts to become more expensive, right? Our time horizons of thinking about how do we get those returns, those financial rewards are shortening, right? Higher discount rates just do that to your cash flows, right? They sort of help you focus on the more immediate term of what's going on, right? But uncertainty plays out over all those scales, right? And you need to reflect that in your assessments. And sometimes that has to come out as part of the framing process. One of the real critical things for me in a framing process is understanding what those uncertainties are and which ones are most, and that gives us something to test later. Which ones are most important, right? Which ones could impact our decision the most along a dimension we care about, for example, financial, right? How you then have that conversation about taking that uncertainty, whatever it is, whether that's workforce availability or capital availability or market volatility or market trajectories, or for your resources and your prices of things, or whether that's government risk, in terms of where you operate and how long that things, and how you then take those things you discover in terms of what's important to you in framing and then understand their consequences through those uncertainty assessments is where that connects, right? That's where that start to connect, right? What can I do in the decisions? What's important to me? And then what are those things that I can't control? And then how could they impact my potential decisions? That's where the kind of analytics begins to marry with the ideas and the concepts and the objectives. And if you've done your framing right, those two things are almost mirror images of each other, right? You can say, these are the things that are important to me in terms of what I want to do. And then understanding uncertainty, how that plays out. And then the analytics gives you insight into what could happen, right? What could be the situation if those things I'm going to do play out with those things that I can't control.
Okay, yeah. So I get that the uncertainty is one of the critical factor that can impact on your priorities when it comes to allocating the right resources and focus. But I love that what you said, that ultimately you really need to be clear, what are you actually trying to achieve as an organization? Okay, if you want to become a leader in renewables, what type of renewables, where, using what type of technology, be really specific in terms of where do you want your organization to go. And that could be the main driver for you to invest in particular projects that could hopefully give you return on investment. And it's interesting because we live in such a crazy world full of uncertainty and all kinds of information and misinformation. And so it's very challenging. Like if you can just like give a little advice to those organizations that perhaps want to pivot, but obviously, like, is this a good time to pivot? Is this maybe should organization just focus on bringing this cash cow and understanding where's the money coming from, or no, or it is actually an amazing opportunity because it's time of change? Like, how do you see with the clients that you're working with, what is their appetite for doing new innovative projects?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like that old saying, right? When's the best time to plant a tree? Well, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, right? But the second best time to plant a tree is tomorrow or today, right? So, if you're thinking about sort of how I pivot, one of the things I like about decision analysis is that it gives you all of those tools to help you understand that, right? It gives you that opportunity to take time, right? First of all, take time to understand kind of, well, what is it if we just kind of continue on our path, right? What does that look like, right? Have that conversation internally, get alignment with your stakeholders. What does that look like? And then do your analytics and say, this is what it looks like, right? And then have that conversation. Well, what if we pivot, right? What if we pivot over here? Ask yourself that what if kind of question. What if we pivot to something completely different, right? Well, that's going to come with a whole bunch of challenges, organizational challenges, transformation challenges, management change challenges, right? But having that framing process, first of all, gives you the opportunity to ask that question openly, right? In a way that people can absorb and kind of get their heads around, right? Start that conversation, gives you then a toolkit to discuss it and structure what does that look like. Start to identify things that are unknown, which will probably be scary, right? Anytime you have management change, like, it's going to be scary. Like, well, we don't know how to do that, or we don't have any skills for people that build robots or whatever it is you're going to do, right? We need to identify those things, those gaps, understand the range of possible ways that they could go out, and test them, right? In a conversation, in a dialogue, right? Before you go and do it, right? This is the kind of the asking yourself the what if question, right? What if we made this decision? What if we made that decision? And in my experience, right now, lots of companies have a lot of appetite to do this, right? We're kind of probably generation change is probably maybe too strong a word, right? But there are a lot of, for example, post-war boomers that are retiring now, and that has brought with it sort of new workers who are kind of at the leading edge of the management space now, and they're generally, across, they're hard to say specifically, but generally that means appetite to sort of change things, do things a little bit differently is very high. And part of that is a reflection of the uncertainties that we're facing, right? We're trying lots of different things, trying lots of different ways. If you're unsure of how to proceed in there, or how you want to test those different ways, well, that's where kind of this decision structured thinking can help you say, well, let's explore that. What does it mean to pivot over here? Or what does it mean to pivot over there? Build some models, have the conversation about what that means for ways we could do that, pick some technologies, pick some sort of new markets we might want to go into, and explore that. And of course, overlaying that is going to be a huge amount of uncertainty, right? So that's why you need to combine those things of, well, what do I want to do to sort of help achieve something? And how's that might play out with things that aren't going to know? And in the innovation space, like it's the appetite to have that conversation is large, right? So
Hmm.
being able to do that in your own efficient way might be a competitive advantage, right? Can we do this more structured, more systematically, make it part of our way of working on an ongoing basis? That could give you a competitive advantage compared to the people who are just, trying stuff and hoping something's going to work. Most of those things are going to fail, right? By definition, almost all those things are going to fail, right? Most innovations don't work. So how can you sort of explore what the consequences of that be? And are those consequences something that we have an appetite for as an organization? Right? And maybe that's part of your objectives, right? If your objective is to get your portfolio more diverse more quickly, well, then you want to try lots of things, right? And that might be a way to structure your portfolios, lots of little bites rather than some big bites in specific areas. So those conversations are the ones you want to have with, well, someone like yourself, right? A facilitator who can help you have that conversation and create those things that you can communicate with.
And this is so interesting. What I haven't thought about it, but actually, you just now gave me a great light bulb to look at opportunity framing process and the whole system that comes with this, and this idea that we actually bringing people into the space when they can have the right conversation. So that particular thing, it's really about creating that competitive advantage. What it's like to work with those kinds of companies, like this is like the ideal stage, and it's not the companies that I work with. So I'm not right now, maybe in the past.
I haven't always been so lucky to work with companies like that, right? I mean, that's some, and every company is different, right? Some companies are really about sort of delivering on something that they know very well and doing that very well, right? That sort of operational efficiency, that kind of thing is really important to them, right? And it certainly has its place, like good project delivery, right? It has its place in terms of the organization, right? But if your organization can't rely on the past forever, right? Growth needs to come, and that growth needs to be part of how you do your business, right? That's critical to be able to create the next thing, also, right? The next product or the next resource or whatever. Now, I don't, always work with at the front edge of sort of innovation. I'm very lucky that BHP has a huge, innovation team that's focused on that. And to the extent that I can help them sort of with structured decision making in that space, I've liked to in the past. But that also, the other dimension of that is, let's just talk about growth, right? Like, it doesn't have to be bleeding edge innovation all the time where your company is sort of, got to pivot into a whole new market and reinvent ourselves wholesale, right? It can be just, growing in an area that we know how to do well, just doing more of it, right? Or doing it more efficiently, or doing it better, or doing it in a new area, or doing it in a new geography, or for a new market, or with a new product that's analogous to what I want to do. And all of those conversations have been, near and dear to my heart. A part of that has been development. I've done some business development in the past. Can we go into a new country? Can we go into a new line of product thinking? And the same toolkit, right? This decision thinking toolkit applies in all of those spaces, right? And we use it in different ways, in different areas, and different sort of focuses. But it applies in every part of that. How do we do more? How do we get better? How do we transform? And you can have this toolkit apply in different ways at any kind of point at which you're doing those different things.
Okay.
And I personally, you asked me how I feel about it. Like, I find it fascinating and exciting, right? I've always been, resources for me is fascinating because I love the subsurface uncertainty, right? This idea that there's, like, resources under the ground and we don't know very much about them, and we have to do this complex thing to get them out and deliver them to our customers. That for me is always the fascinating part. So I really enjoy continuing to do that with teams, and when working through that, I find it fascinating.
So do you want to share some examples, Adrian, of a project? You don't have to reveal too much details. Projects that really went through a frame that helped them achieve either good execution or make some good decisions.
Yeah, some some big ones come to mind, right? I did a big frame, not long after I started doing, framing, in earnest. And it was a big team, challenging operational situation, challenging country situation, challenging venture situation, challenging resources situation, right? And we spent the better part of a week in conversation, in a structured frame conversation. And this was a new way of working for them as well, right? So it was kind of, this is, how do we have this conversation? And the transformation in mindset through the dialogue, the guided dialogue over those 5 days, it's like you watch this sort of like whole series of like light bulbs like going off continuously over many days, right? And you see that feel of satisfaction when people go like, okay, like, I wasn't thinking about this, with this sort of overview and how my sort of piece fit in this overview. And now after these 5 days, I can see that this part is really critical for me to deliver, but I could deliver it in different ways. For example, it's a commercial, structure, or it's a gathering system structure, or a processing system structure, right? That all now kind of hang together in this way that's coherent, right? And at the end, I can see like, oh wait, we need to go and test this because we hadn't thought of that before, and it would be really challenging from a technical sort of space, but it would satisfy a lot of these other things that we need to kind of do, whether that's making it easy to operate, or making it easy for the community to be involved, or whatever it is we need to have them involved. That was a a pretty satisfying project, right? And that one particular one is still ongoing, right? It's a project that will have a long life. But for me, those are the things that make it satisfying as a facilitator to say, I saw someone go from like, this is just too hard and it's just going to getting kicked down the road. And, we're just going to spin our wheels endlessly like we always do. And, we're just going to get this kind of same old muddle through kind of thing to, oh, wait a second, like here's a way we can structure our thinking to go away and deliver some specific things in a specific way to make a clear recommendation to our decision makers and say, hey, this is the path we prefer for these reasons. Now, I wasn't able to follow it through to that analytic part of it, but the framing part of it was very clear, right? It says this is really some distinct ways we could go about this, and these three might be very unattractive for the following reasons, but these other three might be something that we need to explore and really deliver it. And
Mhm.
if you're like a programmer, it's like the end of writing a very long complex piece of code and you're like, oh, it's finally working, it's all kind of great, that has its own satisfaction. And for me, likewise working with great people to sort of help them understand the challenge of their situation in a new context, that's the sort of thrill you get from facilitation for me.
Mhm, mhm.
And
Yeah,
just
and you were the facilitator of the 5 days
oh
workshop, and it's almost like I mean, I remember probably 10 years ago when we would have 3 or 4 days workshops, and there is something magical if you can take
mm,
the people away from the office so they can fully immerse around
mhm,
understanding and exploring what is this problem about, what is this opportunity about, and spend time to really create the new possibility for the project, for the organization, for themselves, and
mm,
obviously then look at, so what are the different options, where is the value coming from, what
yeah,
about stakeholders. And this is really critical because um, uh, there are organizations that are trying to rush this process, and then I've
yeah,
worked with some of them lately. So I want to hear from you. um, so just briefly, I had a situation where there was a lot of constraints. I want you to come for a day. By the way, it's not going to be a full
mm,
day. And then, no,
yeah,
actually, we're going to pay for report. So and it's almost like, sometimes when you're even trying to create a framing, especially for a new organization, they sort of heard about framing. A lot of them
mm,
heard about this, but they haven't really fully implemented the framing. And the worst is to be in that battle when you put in
yeah,
a proposal. Oh, do you know what? Okay, well, we can do it in one day. Uh,
mm,
and so who do you need to become? What kind of organization you need to actually become to be fully able to embrace the concept of framing?
yeah. You, you mentioned some of those challenges earlier about sort of a lot of change, external change in the organization, and that comes with the pressure to react, right? We've got to be seen doing something, right? It's a classic behavioral bias for action, right? We've got to be seen doing something, right? And project people are great at that, right? Because they want to do things, right? They want to deliver something, right? And if you've read Ben Fladberg's book, How Big Things Get Done, one of the tenets is, go slow to go fast, right? If you want to deliver something high quality at the end, that's directly proportional to how much energy and time you spend at the beginning thinking about what it is you want to deliver. Now, my experience is framing can be done in a day. Don't get me wrong, right? But my experience is that that's probably not enough time, especially if it's a big, thorny, challenging question for your, our primitive, neurologic brain here that evolution has given us to absorb, to transform, to change our perspective about a problem, about a situation, about an opportunity, whatever decision it is that we've got in front of us. That's you don't change your mind about big things like that, right? It takes time. It takes systematic thinking. It takes conversations. It takes repeatedly looking at it from different perspectives, from hearing those different perspectives, right? From getting them, letting them absorb into your mind, from sleeping on it. No, well, what did I hear yesterday, right? I heard this and I heard that and I heard this from my other stakeholder and I heard that. And okay, well, that then I need to kind of just wrestle with it in my own mind. What does that mean, or what are the implications, or what is that strategy? Someone said something about that, and I was like, I really kind of want to understand that. That doesn't happen just like in 5 minutes, right? So, the quality that you want to look for is deliberateness, right? Patience, right? And all hard things to do in a world that's going faster, um, has more challenges that seem, completely insurmountable, right? But, there's an old saying, don't try to boil the ocean, right? No project or strategy is going to solve everything for all times, right? Frames are
Mm.
for a time and a place, right? This is for what's in front of us. How do we sort of structure what we can do now? So, those things about patience, those things about deliberateness, those things about systematic structuring, things about looking wide to find the best ideas, and doing that on an ongoing basis, right? These processes, systems, structures, ways of working that are embedded in your culture, right? That let you sort of say, we can do this on an ongoing basis. We deliberately make space in our time, in our calendar, in our mental space to do this, right? And we're happy to just say these other things can wait, right? Um, the difference between the importance and the urgence, right? And often when you have big problems that you're grappling with, where you need a frame or you need a strategy frame, right? Those are important things, and they may be urgent, right? But they may not be urgent, but it's important.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is awesome what you said. So it's not just about doing, but it's about really finding the time to think through
Yeah,
and thinking and sharing, who do we need to become,
yeah,
what we're going to create. So don't get distracted by what's out there. Think about what's in there where you can internally.
yeah.
Um,
Right, but you need to explore, right? I mean, one of the
yeah,
best parts about the strategy, like creating a strategy for is the ideation part. Like, where are all these ideas, right? And some of them may be completely left field. And classic frame fail is we begin to judge those things too early before we evaluate, right? The creative divergent thinking part is, oh, let's get all those ideas out there. And some of them may be hyper immature, right? They may be at technology readiness levels that are very low, right? And some of them may just be like, well, that's a scary thing, but it's pretty mature, and the people that are doing it are doing it really well. And should we
mhm,
do that, right? Ask yourself those questions. Would we do that? And that's one of the best things about the frames, is that you get to bring all those ideas in and give yourself a way to say, okay, yeah, here's an idea, right? We're gonna go look at this, right? We're gonna go spend some time to say, here's this idea. We're gonna go away after the frame and look at this and unpack what this means, and take the requisite time to unpack what this means and the implications for us, for if we went down and took an action on that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I often say in my courses that it's almost like a pressure to deliver. And I
Mm,
say like, and even in the resource industry, I know it does happen in the oil and gas, even for companies that have framing, that's sort of my experience. They still tend to have those executives when they would just come and then they would just say, well, I want you to get it done in 18
mm,
months. This is your budget. This is your
mm,
contractor. This is your technology, like that.
mm,
When they're trying to jump over those initial phases, and then those project managers sort of, they give up at the bait and they just go down and just go and do it, right? So 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 how can we help,
yeah, it's
those companies that some of them might even be unconscious they actually doing it.
yeah, and you need those things, right? You can't deliver big, complex things that take years to deliver and decades to operate without that kind of pressure, right? But that can't be the only thing you have, right? If that's your only solution to creating value for your organization, you're missing some tricks, right? You need more than that, right? And if that's the only kind of uh, you know get it done, we have to go and do it, and here's it's all everything's decided, just go fast, right? If that's all that you're bringing into the frame of your opportunity, well, you're going to get suboptimal outcomes, right? That's a blanket statement, right? But on average, if you are delivering the wrong project really well, you're going to get the wrong project done
Mm.
really well, and it's not going to create the value that you might want for your organization.
I mean, a lot of the people I met in through PMI Project Management Institute. I mean, project managers are really known for being that kind of like make it happen people.
Mm.
They just go get it, right? Like just do it, Nike. Like they love that. They love that. But right, and
Yep.
this is so funny because it's kind of like nothing wrong with this. I am not going against that.
Agreed.
But,
Yeah.
but tell us, like, so who do you normally have in your workshops? Because like if
Oh,
you're working with those
yep.
development managers, I mean, there's like two different personalities. So you might bring one of those project manager, but you
Yep.
don't want like 10 of them. So
No.
you're really
Yeah.
gonna.
Yeah. And it's also classic frame fail is not having the people in the conversation who are going to have to inherit this, right? And whether that's someone operationally, someone from project delivery, or combination of both, right? If that voice isn't in the room as well, right? And this usually comes down to things like practicality or doability or maintainability or something, some sort of thing to actually make it work, right? They're also going to have a lot of resistance to sort of the proposed solution, right? So, and we've talked mentioned the word stakeholders lots of different times, and in your frame process, the stakeholders can be everyone from, your regulator, maybe, if you really want to go down that space, like having them in the conversation, how are we actually solving this, all the way through though to those people who have to inherit it. Increasingly in resources, that extends all the way through to an end of project life, right? What are we going to do with this asset when we're done with it? Closure or abandonment or whatever you want to call it. That voice is also in the room at the start, right? Because that's the scale of and breadth of the conversation that you want to have. And they may not have a lot to say, right? If you're at the sort of are we doing the right project sort of phase, that's sort of like let's just get it done, or let's think about closure or the things. Their voice may not be the most frequent one in the conversation, but they're hearing the conversation, right? They're hearing that you've debated this way of going about it or that way of going about it, and thinking about maybe the breadth of what you're considering. And they may have some really great ideas to make those both happen and to expand the thinking on that, right? And they may have some great intermediate or hybrid step, right? Well, we could go from here to where we are now to this next sort of solutions phase very easily. And that might be an attractive way that we could deliver our opportunity or deliver our decision in doing it. And we want to capture that, right? And say, this is how it's reflected, right? Uh,
Mm.
so, not having those voices of who's then going to have to, inherit the decision about our course of action and then deliver that is a way to really get yourself in a muddle also. Now, that's not always possible, right? It's not always possible to have every single person in there. And sometimes it depends on the type of decision it is. If it's really a decision about some sort of way of changing operations, not having operational people in there who are going to have to either implement it or maybe are suggesting the change themselves, and project people are like, oh, we don't want to do that, right? Not having that right group is also a way to fail you in your frame, right? Because then you're not having the right group of stakeholders there to discuss the solution. So it's that's why framing is so fun, right? Is you get to touch a lot of these different parts of both the organization and the stakeholder groups that might be relevant or whatever it is that you're talking about. That's also
Mm.
really enjoyable. Like you get to meet a lot of different, really interesting people.
Yeah, yeah, this is spot on. There's a lot of change managers, and they kind of like seem to say the same that you can't create a change without the people who being impacted by the change. Tell us, Adrian, when is not a good time to do framing? What are some of those instances that maybe it's too late? I don't know, or it's overkill.
Yeah, I mean, because framing is at its heart about kind of alignment, right? If the alignment is already sort of very high, that's you don't necessarily need that. That's not the decision sort of making tool that you need to pick up, right? You want to match your sort of if you think about we need to make a decision, right? You want to match those tools that you're using with the sort of situation that you're in, right? If it's well, we have a lot of uncertainty, but there's a lot of alignment. Well, going and getting information and focusing on information gathering is more important for your decision making process, and that might be for resource exploration drilling for a company that doesn't know about the markets. It might be understanding the markets for the company that doesn't know, what their customers actually want. Like, well, let's go and talk to the customers, right? Like if you're sort of aligned on the course of action, but the problem is not that, well, then framing is not the tool that you pick up, right? You pick up a different tool in the decision science, you know, oeuvre, right? Right. Like all, you know, yeah, even project management, right? You don't pick up a different tool if that's not the problem that you're trying to solve, right? You match the tool to what you're trying to solve. So,
Yeah.
for me, framing is about when you don't have that alignment or you don't have that clarity, or there is, mismatches in terms of expectations, or mismatches in terms of what people are anticipating or what people want to do. That's the time to get framing and start doing your alignment. If you're well past that point and it's something else, then you get a different toolkit.
It's really about finding the right tool for the right purpose. And it's almost like anytime, really. I mean, that was my experiences, even during development phase. When you feel like there is not enough focus, or you worried like you're not going to go through the gate,
Mm,
um, the teams often would just want that to bring everything together and like
yeah.
reinforce the message, just
Yep.
to make sure we all understand, because
Yeah.
it's also such a great team
Yeah.
building. Like,
Yes.
you're often bringing those people who like hardly ever work together. So how
Yeah.
do you create
Yeah.
alignment? They never
Yeah.
even known each other.
Yeah. Often. Yeah. Often. Yeah. 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 I guess that's probably a critical part as well, because a lot of, like, if you think about studies, right, and sort of like before we go and make a recommendation from the study, right, they're getting that alignment in terms of what we've learned through the study, right? Well, that's an information sharing kind of exercise, right? And you may think of framing as part of that, right? But I think of framing kind of as more of a, which direction are we going, right? That part of what have we learned as we've gone along that direction through engineering studies or geologic studies or market studies or analytic studies, that information sharing along the way is a critical part of the decision dialogue, right? That's the sort of check-in moments, right? Let's go talk to the decision maker. What have we learned from how we could solve the problem to how relative attractive these are? That's a critical communication piece, right? And the more you bring those structured, artifacts of the communication process through that, the easier it gets for your organization to do that, because it becomes routine. Like, we always produce a strategy table, and we always produce a Monte Carlo simulation on value, or we always produce a conditional simulation for geologic resources. We always do whatever it is we need to do through these systematic steps to sort of track the information state in our mind, and then let it play out with the rest of that process of the decision making. Yeah.
So very quickly they realize they only know what they know, but then they already know that they don't know so much. And
Yeah.
it's like this famous picture. It's from the American poet. You probably know that, because I know a lot of framing facilitators using that. That big elephant, and then the blind people coming and touching different parts of the elephant and trying to guess.
Yeah.
What do you see? And it
Yeah.
is so funny watching that the same. And by that, they really begin to understand that to even come to create a vision or solutions, they have to have first shared understanding about what is the current state. And that
Yeah.
is so fundamental.
Yeah.
So it's just, and that's the beauty of the structure, that you can even use it for, improvement projects.
Yeah.
Your company introduce a technology, they're struggling with adoption. How can we create a better adoption rate? Well, bring people together and first have them to create that shared understanding about what's broken before we move
Yeah.
anywhere
And
else.
and that yeah, that grounding step, right? That, do we have a shared common understanding as part of your frame, is pretty critical, right? Like, in that
Yeah,
large project I mentioned that we talked about, right? We spent more than half a day just on grounding,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Just
Oh,
on,
okay.
do we all actually have a shared understanding of what's the situation here, right?
Yeah,
And that part was critical, right? Because then and there it's, as a framing facilitator, right? It's important that you say, like, well, these people need to be heard and give them a voice, right? Like, I want you to talk for 20 minutes. Like, I want you to come in here and I want you to tell me all about this for 20 minutes. Because there'll be people in the room, I guarantee, that haven't heard that, right? Some of the decision makers will have, right? Because that's how the information tends to flow, right? But now you're sort of sharing it across the team and giving everyone to get on that common page. That's a very important step
yeah.
for the more complex the problem, the more decision situation, the more complex the information needs to be that's going into that, right? The more robust, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I would give 20 people in the room, 20 minutes each.
that was a big one, right? That was a big one.
Yeah, that would be
and not everybody in the room, not everybody,
5 minutes, everyone is
represented.
lost.
A selection. Yeah.
But I think I understand what you're saying, and I've got a question for you. So so what do you think about AI? Is it going to like replace the framing stage or the ideation stage, or maybe the options? I know it's a new topic. What's going on in Australia? What are you guys exploring in relation to AI and decision making? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I'm not an AI expert, right? So my opinions are probably, I have some, but I wouldn't call them gospel yet, right? But my experience so far is that AI is going to be like all other excellent complex tools. It's going to be something that's going to enhance things that we do, right? And and we'll be able to do more of them or more efficiently, right? I mean, we've already seen tons of examples from the generative AIs of ideation of different sort of iterations on themes, creating images, videos, to do this, very very rapidly, right? Um, and if that helps expand people's thinking to start internalizing, how I can create solutions or what solutions are possible, then that's going to really complement, all the things that we do, right? And for things that are fairly repeated, where there is a good training set, tools like AI to help automate decision making, repeated decisions are definitely going to have a huge place in organizations, right? For those other things where there's not a huge training set, or there's not a big analog, or it is about sort of people getting their head around a different course of action, those big bets or those one-offs or those fairly rare decisions, right? It's going to be a complement to that rather than, I think, a replacement for it, right? I mean, I mentioned earlier about lots of companies taking multi-billion-dollar decisions on a routine basis, but you might take a $10 billion decision only, occasionally, right? Maybe every few years, maybe only a couple of decades, right? So you're going to need to help people with those kind of scale decisions as they go along. And in that regard, it may not even be the same people that frame the decision, that study the decision, that take the decision, and then implement the decision, right? If you're talking about that process itself taking a decade, the continuity within that team may have completely been transformed, right? And so you need to have ways of communicating and internalizing that knowledge with people who are doing that work, right? You can't just rely on it being, in an expert system somewhere. And that might help, but it's probably not going to replace that.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Adrian. It was such a pleasure to host you.
Likewise. Thank you.
You've actually done more than an hour so quickly. I think I need to get you back because you're just so easy to talk to, and I think you're very clear. And you've got a great expertise when it comes to framing and decision analysis. So let's watch how AI is going to revolutionize our decision making, hopefully for the good. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, and keep in touch. And I will see you on LinkedIn.
All right. Likewise. We'll see you soon. Thanks for having me.